In this video, I'll go over the basic functions and features in the NCV Classic software in Sierra Summit version 3.1. When you first start a new study, you'll be presented with the navigator screen, which is where you can go to select different tests and nerves and muscles, etc. The Studies tab gives you the option to select a study, which is a pre-selection of different nerves and muscles for EMG. You can set up studies by clicking in the study list editor, where you can create studies and drag whatever nerves or muscles in whatever order into those studies. Alternatively, you can go to the All Tests tab and select the NCV test or the F-wave and H-reflex test and select which muscles or nerves, which nerves you want to do. I'm going to start with a study, and I'm going to select the study and then just double click on the nerve that you want to start with. So in this case, I'm going to start with the left median antidromic sensory. In the right hand window, this is our study window where we can see all the tests and in this case nerves that are in that study, and it's selected the median sensory. In the results table, I can see the sites that are available to stimulate, as well as a blank site which allows me to continually stimulate other sites or additional sites as needed. So I'm going to start by stimulating using the Stimtroller, and you can stim. The wheel will increase the intensity, or the yellow knob on the base unit will increase intensity, and then pushing the stim button on the Stimtroller or pushing the yellow knob on the base unit will deliver the pulse. So you can increase your stimulus until you get a response that you like. Once you find your super maximal response, then you can just hit store, which will take you to the next site. If you don't need to collect any more data than just this one trait or one site, you don't have to hit store. You can just enter your distance and move on. To enter your distance, you can just hit the 1 button on the Stimtroller or the F1 button on the base unit, and that will bring up your distance dialog. If you use the base unit, you can just type that in. With the Stimtroller, you can turn the knob to change that. You'll notice this was preset to 14, so if the distance was 14, I don't even have to do this step because I can just move on to the next test. But if maybe I measured a different distance, I can adjust that with the Stimtroller wheel. And then hitting store will save that distance, and then I can hit number 2 to move on to the next test. If I want to go back and pick a different trace that I stimulated, in the top right corner there's a black button, which is my trace history, and that will show me all the traces that I've stimulated or collected for this site, and I can pick a different trace and then select replace with highlighted trace, or I can select multiple traces, and if I select more than one trace, the blue trace at the bottom is showing me the average of those traces. So now I can click replace with average trace, and it's going to replace this trace with the blue trace here. And then to move on to the next test, I'm going to hit the number 2 button or the next button on the base unit, and that takes me to the ulnar sensory. If I want to skip that test, I just hit the number 2 button again and move right on to the median motor. Looks like I have it selected twice in this test. And adjust your electrodes as needed. So just like in the sensory tests, we can stimulate with the stimulator, and you can find your super maximal response. Once you get a response you like, just hit store, and that takes you to the next site. In this case, it's set up for elbow. Hit elbow response, and then I'm going to hit store if I want to move on, and then I'm going to enter the 1 button on the Stimtroller for distance, or the F1 button on the base unit. So I'm using the Stimtroller and turning the wheel to increase the distance, and then I'm going to store, hit 1 again for the next segment, and then store, and then I'm going to hit the number 2 button to move to the next test. If you need to adjust cursors, you can simply drag them with your mouse, or the pink button on the base unit, you can turn that to adjust a cursor and push the button down to select a different cursor until you have the cursor you want to move in yellow. If you want to re-stimulate a site, so for example, if I would want to re-stimulate the wrist site, there's a couple ways you can do that, but I think the easiest way is if you just go to wrist and select that site. You'll notice because I hadn't stored my axilla site, it moved that site up. So it thinks that way I could replace the wrist site with that site. I want to go back to axilla because I'm going to continue to stimulate and store that. And that moves my live trace down to the next site. And here I can go ahead and stimulate the wrist and move it later, or I can go to the wrist first and stimulate. I'm going to just go ahead and stimulate where it is. So I'm going to go back to the wrist and stimulate the wrist. So here it's on the herb site, but because it's still white, it hasn't been stored in that site yet, so I can move it. So if I like this trace better than the wrist, I can simply go to the wrist and push store, and that replaces the wrist site. Alternatively, you can go to the wrist first before you stimulate, and if you do this method, then when you stimulate the wrist again, it automatically brings up your trace history window, and then you can just go, once you find a response that you like, you'd go into your trace history window, select that site, and click replace, and it would keep that particular site. So that's how you re-stim a site. Like I said earlier, the blank trace allows you to continually stimming sites as many as you need, so I can keep stimming additional sites, and pushing store just keeps giving me more blank sites. At that point, if I wanted to, I could come back and I could rename these sites. Or I can just delete these traces. If I highlight a trace with my mouse and hit delete, that will delete the site. Or you can right click your mouse and you can delete all or delete selected traces. On occasion, a mistake may be made whether either you select, you were testing the wrong side, so maybe I was testing a right side and I had selected a left side nerve, or maybe you tested out of order. So to fix either of those mistakes, I simply right click on the test itself, and then you can select swap sides, and that would actually move all these responses to the right side, or the right test. So if I do that, you'll notice that that left median nerve now moved up here, and all these traces are stored as right median motor. I can go back and swap sides again and move those all back to the left. If I tested out of order, I can right click and I can either sort traces by latency, and that would automatically sort the traces according to earliest latency, or I can adjust traces manually with my mouse, and then right click and update traces by position, and that will relabel them based on the position that I left them in. If I again now go to right click and sort by latency, it orders them based on latency. So that's how you can fix mistakes in classic nerve conduction. If you want to, like I said, change anything around as far as the recording site or the stim site, just click and type in what you want, and you can click and type in what you want for the recording site as well. So all that can be changed on the fly. I'm going to move into F-Wave. I'm going to go to the F-Wave. And in F-Wave, it's set up to remember the stim intensity if you want it to from the wrist motor response. So as soon as I start stimulating, actually, it should find super maximal, but I can go ahead and find super maximal if I've already adjusted the stimulation, and then I can push F1 on the base unit or the 3 button on the stim controller to go into auto store mode, and now every time I stimulate, it's going to store the response. You'll notice it's automatically trying to adjust the latency or mark the latency for me. That's the blue line. So I can adjust the blue line either with the purple or pink knob or dragging the latency marker. There's another feature in F-Wave if you want to get rid of this slant in the F-Wave, which is a result of the M-Wave. And I can see that by moving the split line over. You can see the M-Wave, when shown in the same gain, causes the F-Wave baseline to be slanted. So if you right-click your mouse, you can select M removal, and that just subtracts that M wave out of the F response, so you get a much flatter baseline to look at your F waves. And then if you want to compare these F waves in an overlaid view, just hit F2, and that will make them overlaid, and then you can adjust the cursor as needed to check your latency. The blue knob on the base unit is always gain, and for F-Wave you can toggle between gain F and gain M. When you're in a motor or sensory response, the blue knob is gain or sweep. So if you change the blue knob, it's going to adjust your gain, and if you push it down and then turn it, now it adjusts your sweep. If you want to add any other nerve to your list that may not be in the study, just simply go to your navigator, which is F7. That brings the navigator back up right into the test that you're in, which is NCV, and you can select any other nerve that you want to test for NCV. And then just hit OK. And now you have additional nerves in your test to test. So that's the basic functions of NCV Classic in Sierra Summit version 3.1.